All right, this is the August 2022 meetup of the WordPress Naperville meetup. Thanks for coming, everyone. Today we're talking about accessibility. Brief announcements before we get started. If you want to join the WordPress Naperville Slack channel, leave your email in the chat and we'll make sure to get you an invitation. We will be posting the slides that we're using in the comments of the meetup event listing on meetup.com after we finish. And the video of this will be posted on YouTube in the Chicagoland WordPress meetup channel, which the link for that will also be posted in the comments after the meetup. Okay, I'm going to get started by sharing my screen here. One moment, please. Okay, can everybody see the beginning slide there? Great.
Are you going to be able to maximize the window at all?
That is a good question.
Like if you double click on the browser top bar.
Thank you. Yes. Is that better?
Right, yes, thank you.
Okay. All right. We're talking about simple accessibility improvements for your website. Brief introduction to what accessibility is. Basically, it's making sure that your website is as inclusive as possible, that all different types of users using all different types of devices can interact with your website, can get what they need from it, and be happy users. Why should we worry about accessibility? It's kind of a buzzword in a lot of the web content, web design areas right now. For one thing, it's federal law. Websites are considered a public place of accommodation according to the Americans with Disabilities Act. That doesn't mean that people are going to come after you and sue you if your website is not accessible. It just means that if you're working for a state or federal agency, or if you're working for an agency that upholds the accessibility guidelines of the ADA, this is something that you need to take into account. It's also just a matter of courtesy to your users. According to WHO, 50% of people globally have a disability of some sort. And besides that 15%, many of us in our daily lives can face limitations that make us interact with web pages in ways that are similar to having certain disabilities or limitations. For example, visual limitations. Your users could be outside in the sunlight on their phone. They might not be able to see color contrast in the way someone sitting inside an office in a fluorescent light might see. As we get older, all our eyesight gets worse. You hear people my age and older complaining about small font sizes all the time. It's just a fact of life. Vestibular difficulties. Many people who consider themselves totally able-bodied can't handle unexpected movements on web pages. You're navigating around the internet and suddenly there's parallax motion or a scroll, things moving around, and it makes you feel sick. It can be very disorienting, even to someone who has no other problems with motion sickness or anything like that. Attention and cognitive difficulties could be things like reading level. Are you looking at content that's in your native language? Are you super stressed out and busy? Is your website a website where people are maybe in a situation where they need emergency information, or even if it's like a restaurant and people are super hungry, they don't want to read your life history, they want to see the menu. People's attention is a limited supply that they have every day. This is 2022 and none of us are on the internet for the sheer joy of, interacting with the World Wide Web anymore. We're all there to get information and get on with our lives. And then not everyone, many people have connectivity issues. Some people are on prepaid phone plans. Some people are in rural environments where their connection might be a little spotty. Not everyone is on high-speed broadband connections. And this is just something to keep in mind in your website, depending on who your audience is, depending on the content of your website. The people who are coming to your website may have issues like this in their daily lives that you're not aware of. So it's just courteous to them. And of course, a very practical consideration is that search engine optimization is affected by accessibility. Googlebot and the other search engine bots are basically acting as if they were screen readers, as if they were assistive technology. They can't see the beautiful layout of your page. They can't see how the images and colors interact. They see the text from top to bottom and they read it like that. So when you structure your page and pay attention to the fundamentals of accessibility, you are helping Google and other search engines understand what's on your page and understand how to interpret it and how to weight it in search results. It's probably the most significant reason to embrace accessibility for most of us is purely practical. Very briefly, there is a standard for accessibility. I always call it WCAG or WCAG. Nobody really knows how to pronounce it, I don't think. There's different levels, AAA, AAAA. Some, like federal and state agencies, have mandates that they need to meet, say, an AA guideline or an AA certification. Most of the websites you're dealing with probably don't need to be certified in this way, but there's sort of and it's sort of tiered so that A is the easiest standard to meet and AAA is extremely hard. For my clients, we kind of aim for AA, and we probably don't get the official AA designation most of the time, but it's something to shoot for as a goal. Again, very briefly, the principles of web accessibility according to WCAG 2.1 are that web content should be perceivable. That should be that means no matter what the device, no matter what assistive technology you're using, users should be able to tell what is on your web page. They should be able to interact with it. It should be operable. They should be able to understand it. It should be in terms that make sense to them, and it should be robust. It shouldn't just break when they touch it. So this is all pretty basic, and hopefully we're all building websites that meet at least these minimum goals, or we're building websites that we know are going to be high quality in these ways. If anyone has any questions, just feel free to either type it in the chat and we'll stop and check the chat, or just unmute yourself and jump in if it's particularly relevant. Picture Pawn, you have to stop doing that. I'm going to kick you out. Okay. Sorry about that, everyone. Okay, where are we? So what do we as website creators and site owners and content editors do? We basically just have to keep accessibility in mind as we're starting to build a site, as we're choosing our theme, as we're writing content, as we're deciding how landing pages look. It's just something it's a little extra effort at every point in your site, rather than, we don't all need AA certification. We don't need consultants. We don't need an accessibility service. We just need to be aware of certain things in the content and just put a little effort into building the site, making the content. And specifically, one of the ways to do this is just pretend. As you're putting your site together and as you're reviewing it, as you're creating pages, pretend that you're assistive technology, pretend that you're a text-only reader or a Googlebot. Use tab navigation, look at the structure of your site and some tools I'm going to show you, and just see how it looks when you take away all the images and the layout and the columns and the colors. And when your site is more complete, you can also use an accessibility scanning tool to get sort of an overview report. But as you're building the site, it's kind of just, look at it as yourself, and then also just pretend you're a robot and look at it in that way. And we'll go through some examples of how to do that. So we have 10 simple tips for accessibility, and they're grouped by content, which is sort of like if you have a WordPress site and you've opened a page and edited a post, you can do this. WordPress and plugin configuration, which is digging a little deeper into different parts of the admin panel, and then design and layout. Stacy's going to go over some things where if you know CSS, if you're a little more of an advanced user, you'll be able to use these tips. They're also probably useful for page builders when we get to those. So my content tips: correct document structure, specific link text, captions for images, alt tags for images, and using screen reader text. Just a minute. Okay, correct document structure is one of the main things you can do, probably the first most fundamental underlying thing you can do to make sure that your website is legible to assistive technology and to a search engine's bot. And let me show you, if you have never done this before, what we're talking about when we say document structure is the actual HTML document structure. This is very small, but you can see that it begins with HTML. It's got different tags. There's a body, there's a head. Inside the head, there's certain elements. These are all things that we usually don't worry about. And in WordPress, you usually don't have to worry about this level of document structure. In WordPress, there are, here, I've got the link here. Oh, sorry, that link did not work as a link. This link I have at the bottom links to the WordPress theme repository's accessibility ready tag, and a theme that is accessibility ready has already passed WordPress's official accessibility audit, and it will generate the correct document structure for you. Basically everything that's around everything on a page that's around the part where you're actually typing in your content will be correctly generated by a theme that has the accessibility ready tag. And these days, most themes should do that. It would be themes like Divi 2021. They're going to have this classification. One of the things, so that leaves what's the content itself and how that is structured in the document tag. So I'm going to talk a little about headers, because that's one of the main things that we need to worry about, and it's super useful for Google. To have your headers structured correctly. So this is the PlayStation blog. It's huge. We don't actually need to see it so close up. I like the PlayStation blog because it has a lot of pretty images and it's made in WordPress. When I create content, when I'm working on a website, I use this browser extension called SEO Meta in one click. And what it does is it's designed for SEO. That's what they say it's for, but it actually is super useful for accessibility because it shows you the header structure of the web page in this very clear way. And the headers, if you're not familiar, are titles. They're right here where it says spotlight post, they're labels of sections of the site. And so what you want to do when you use headers on your website is to make sure that you're always using them. This is a great example here. They're always used hierarchically in an outline form where every page has an H1 at the top. And that's the only H1 on the page. And then H2s are used as section headers, and H3s can be titles or subsections within that section header. And you always want to make sure that you're not skipping, like you wouldn't put an H4 directly inside an H2. And you want to make sure that it's nested like this, that it literally forms an outline of the page. This makes it easier for a search engine bot to understand the content of your page. And also if someone is using assistive technology, they can navigate through the sections, like they would get to lead stories and they would understand that, okay, these next links are going to be lead stories. I'm not actually looking for lead stories. I can skip to the next H2. And they can then use this level of heading as navigation through the site and not have to read every single headline in a section that they may not be interested in. Does that make sense to everyone? This is a pretty easy thing to pay attention to when you're making content. And it makes a big difference in the correctness and accessibility of the page structure. WordPress will actually tell you when you're editing. WordPress kind of tries to get you to choose an H1 or an H2 or an H3 as you're editing content. Let me move on to my second tip for content editing is having specific link text. This is probably something that's pretty old hat to most of us by now. WordPress doesn't do it anymore. WordPress used to automatically put read more or click here at the end of excerpts in archives. And I was just messing around with the query loop, which creates lists of teasers. And it seems like they don't do that anymore. But I do have some plugins that still do that. Like here's bad teaser list settings, my bad teaser list settings page. On our demo site. So query loop, this is one of the Gutenberg blocks that's in the block editor in core WordPress. This is just something, a block you can use to create little lists of teasers like that. And it's really good about making sure that the title is a link. In fact, if I click in here and go to post title, in the link settings on the right, I can make the title a link or not. And that lets me control the content of the page so that my links for the teasers are these extremely specific titles of posts. And that's a great way to manage links on your pages. For teasers, just make the title of the post that you're linking to the link itself. This is the same sort of thing, a list of teasers that I made using a plugin that used to be called Ultimate Add-ons for Gutenberg and is now called Spectra. And it was my favorite plugin for like 2 years. But when you create this post grid, which unfortunately the colors aren't looking very good, but they automatically add a read more at the end of every teaser, which is exactly what we don't want. We want the link text to be the text of the post itself, which they do, but they do have the text linked here, but they also have this read more link. When I'm navigating around, and I can pretend to be an assistive technology device or a Google bot just by using tab to navigate, can you make out how it's highlighting my links as I tab around?
Yes.
As I do that, imagine that I'm a bot or a person using this. Let me go around. So I go down here, I come here, and the image is a link. The title is a link. It reads to me, Walter is a fool. That's your link text. Then it goes down here and it reads to me, read more is your link text. I kind of know that read more is the link that it just read to me a minute ago, but that means that for every teaser on this page, something that a sighted user who is looking at this can just skip over and completely ignore. A person who's using assistive technology has to click twice for every link that they're passing to understand what the content of the page is or to get to the next thing they're looking for. So it's basically like putting a roadblock there for your users, and it adds nothing to Google's understanding of the page. Just don't do it. Just make the title of a post itself the link and you're gold. Okay. My next slide is captions for images. This is something I work with a guy who does a lot of content strategy. And he was telling me, or rather he was telling the client, and I was listening, that captions are one of the most read things on a page. And as I thought about it, it totally makes sense to me. When I'm, say, like flipping through a magazine, I'm looking at the pictures and I look at the captions directly under the picture. It's basically what I look at right after I look at headlines and before I start reading the actual text in the page. And when we're scanning a website, your brain kind of skips over big walls of text or big chunks of text, unless you know that the text contains information you're looking for, and kind of picks out images as sort of these stepping stones to go from part of the page to different parts of the page. And captions being right under the images means that they are read more than the body copy of the page by more users. I looked around the internet and I saw statistics from anywhere from 16% more to 300% more. So in terms of giving people, in terms of imparting meaning in your content, and in terms of helping people make sense of what the content on your page is about, simply adding captions to images adds a lot of meaning and provides a shortcut to users to help process the content on your page. related to using captions for images is using alt text for images. This is something that SEO people talk about a lot because it is super important. An alt tag is real brief. I'll show you I'm doing a right click. I'm in Chrome and then I'm clicking inspect on this menu and it shows me the HTML for this element that I was just looking at. And I just made it go away behind my screen. Sorry. Let's just do that again. Okay, so here's the image, this Call of Duty image, I guess, and you can see that it's alt text right here says alt Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 campaign early access to. Basically, this website is using their post title as their alt text, which I wouldn't say is a requirement, but it's certainly very specific, and it does tell the screen reader or the bot that's parsing that image tag exactly what that image is for and what content it's related to on the page. I've linked in these slides to a really useful article that goes into a lot of depth about alt text, how to use alt text, what sort of things to put in your alt text for SEO purposes and for accessibility purposes. I think the single most useful tip is if the image is decorative, leave the alt text blank. That is, if your image is on the page to just look pretty and it's not providing information, it doesn't need to be there. If the alt text is blank, the screen reader and the Google bot are just going to skip it. Let me show you an example of a decorative image. So this is a New York Times article. It's about the Federal Reserve or something. And you don't need to know what this is an image of, or even that it's there to understand the text on the page. It's not a graph, it's not a chart, it's not a picture of the Federal Reserve or whatever. So if we look at this, we can see that its alt tag right there is just blank. So to assistive technology or a bot, this image is not there. It just skips over it. It knows it's meaningless.
I would add to that the one on the PlayStation, since it's just duplicating the title, the screen reader is going to read that out twice, which is not valuable information. So I would say,
yeah,
if you're going to take that route, it's better to not just describe what the image is, but like describe its intent. So if you can't see the image, how would you describe, or if you can see the image, how would you describe it to someone else verbally? And that's maybe what you should have in your alt text.
Yeah, that's a whole philosophy. Like, do you say something like, this is super cool 4G graphics showing rendering or something like that? Yeah, there's definitely a lot to think about for alt tags. Leah, the name of the browser plugin is an extension for Chrome. It's called SEO Meta in one click. And I do have a link to it in the slides that I can show you again at the end. Yeah, do I have any better examples of alt text? There's this article that I linked to right here has tons of examples, and they really get into it. It's kind of like if you look at any articles about, or any articles for photographers about doing captions, it's the same sort of thing. Just be as specific as possible. Make sure it's adding meaning to your page and helping users understand the content, or just leave it out. Yeah, SEO is a huge factor in alt text.
And also you don't have to use the word image or screenshot, or maybe screenshots, it tells you what type it is. But if you say graphic or image, like we already know that the screen reader reads it out for you. So you can skip that word.
The screen reader will say, it'll say something like image, and then it'll read the alt tag. If it's an illustration, definitely put the word illustration in, I would say, especially if it's an illustration by someone or in a certain style. If it's a chart, you probably want to have a pretty good description of what the chart shows, and then maybe even go into your long desk field or some other, or have something that's not or that's next to the image but is associated with the image, so the users can read more information about it. Yeah, there's I usually decide on the sites that I build that most of the images are decorative and they just don't need to be there, so I just leave my alt tags blank. Except for charts, there just really aren't many images on the sites I build, but I'm like, the users really, really need to see this. They're usually like nice stock images or, pretty sunsets or something just there to rest the eyes or to provide vibes. I think the PlayStation site is probably trying to leverage the SEO capabilities of alt text. That's probably why they're doing the titles the way they are, just so the images show up in Google image search for that phrase, as well as the post title itself showing up for that phrase. Okay, screen reader text. Screen reader text is a CSS class that exists in WordPress. I'm going to show you sort of the easy way to do this, and then Stacy added some detail about a more sort of sophisticated way to do this. But the easy way is pretty easy, about as easy as we could do here. Okay, so what is screen reader text? Back at the PlayStation blog, I'm looking at this with my eyes and I see this is a huge, big hero image. It must be their top story. These are pretty big. These are probably pretty important stories. This is a sidebar. That's probably secondary content in some way. Down here, we have trending stories. Down here, we have latest posts. So I, looking at this, can easily understand the structure of the page and understand that this is the top story just because it has the biggest image. If I'm tabbing around with my tab, if I'm a technology of some sort, I'm going to come here and I'm going to get down to this title, and it's just going to launch me. This isn't working the way I wanted it to. Where are we? There we go. It just launches me into title. I just go straight from search to Call of Duty. And then next, I'm going to go through down to deeper look at the gameplay and soundtrack. And as far as I know, I've just embarked on having read out loud to me an infinite list of PlayStation articles. I don't know where I am on the page. I don't know what else is on the page. I don't know how long I'm going to be clicking before I hit something else. But let's look at how this looks in SEO meta in one click. Let's look at the header structure of the page. Check this out. There's this header lead stories. There's this header trending stories. There's this latest posts. I see trending stories. I see latest posts. Lead stories is not visible on the page to me. Lead stories is screen reader text. And we can inspect this, but I also have a screenshot of it, what it looks like. It looks like it's an H2 and it just has class screen reader text. And what that does is hide it visually, but leaves it in the document structure so that assistive technology or a bot registers it just the same way it registers the headers that I can read. So let me show you how to do that. And let's also briefly, why would you do that? You would do that you basically do it when your layout is implying a context that isn't there in the text of the page. Like if you have like 3 top stories and they're just in a row across the top of your site, you know that they're your top stories. The person who's looking at your site and sees the images and the font size knows they're your top stories. Bots and screen readers do not know they're your top stories because it's kind of inferred from the design. So let's look at how to do that. Where's my page? Oh, my homepage. Okay, so I made a bad homepage that does that thing. It has 3 top stories. And if I look at this in SEO meta with one click, it goes right from my H1, the site title, right into just a giant list of posts. And, woe betide the user who wants to actually get to whatever's at the bottom of the page because they're just in a line. They don't know where they're going. So what I can do to help screen readers is I can add a heading. I'm going to make it an H2. WordPress detects where I am on the page and suggests my H2. So there's my H2. And in WordPress, this class already exists in WordPress as part of WordPress core. I want to make sure I've got my block selected. Go down to advanced, and my class is going to be screen-reader-text, text with an X. Okay, what happened? First off, it disappeared because it hides it. Screen reader text hides that header. It hides it everywhere. It's hidden it in the editor as well. If I go up here, I can see it. I can see that there's a heading here. If I click on this in the list view of my blocks, it'll show it to me. but if I make that go away, it's invisible. It's kind of confusing. But on this page now, if I look at my document structure, whoops, no, you know what else I've done? I forgot step 2, which is make sure you're nesting your headers correctly. Now I've got my header the same level as my post titles underneath it. That's a query loop, so I can just go in there and edit that. Here's my query loop. In my query loop, I want to make sure that this is an H3. There we go. Now, when I look at my page, there we go. That's what the page is. That's the page's structure. There's a site title, which also serves as the page title on this homepage. There's a header that describes what the top stories are, and then there's the top stories themselves, their titles. And then if I want to navigate, I can just skip to the next H2, which is a different section, and the next one, which is another section further down the page. Now, the obvious drawback to doing it this way, this is built right into WordPress. All you need to do is remember to click on, where are we? Beep. There we go. All you need to remember to do is select your block and click on advanced down here and type screen reader text here. But a nicer way to do it is to have a header that is invisible on the front end, but that you can see it in the admin panel when you're editing. So Stacy has provided us the CSS for a class called SR only, which is sort of a more sophisticated version of screen reader text. And what it will do, we have the link here. Here's the code for it, which you can copy paste into your website. Here's the link. It'll be in the slides that we've posted. You can copy and paste this into your website, into the appearance, customize, additional CSS. Just grab this whole chunk when you go to this link that Stacy has created, and that will create a, Stacy, correct me if I'm wrong here, but that will basically do the same thing, but you'll be able to see it in your content in the admin panel, and it won't be quite as confusing as having a completely invisible header.
And it will always be highlighted, so you know there's something different about that.
So it'll look like this. Oh, that is nice. So it'll say screen reader only content. That's super nice. Yeah, that's very handy.
And you can call that class whatever you want, as long as you update the CSS to coordinate with it. I just like short names. So SR means screen reader.
Yeah.
But the WP block stuff is important in the editor, because that's how the editor will be reading that CSS.
Right.
And that's why it works it works differently on the front and back end.
So that's if you're comfortable with cutting and pasting CSS into Customizer, which isn't much of a step beyond editing content right in the admin panel, but it's one more. Yeah, we're going to have, Danielle, we're going to have the slides posted on the meetup page after the meetup. I just haven't put them there yet. Okay, any questions about any of those things? I'm going to move into configuration tips, things that are in WordPress and plugin settings. Okay, don't link thumbnails and titles and label every form element. Okay, don't link thumbnails and titles. This kind of relates to what we were saying about the PlayStation site earlier, that when you are tabbing around, you're going to read the alt tag for the image, and it's going to be exactly the same as the post title. They're doing that to boost SEO. It's fine. In a teaser, where's my bad teaser code? Okay. So in a teaser, a lot of times you see, can you see where my tab outline is on the image here? This is one link to the Walter is a Fool page, and this is another link to the Walter is a Fool page. If I'm navigating around with a screen reader, I have the exact same link read to me twice, which is just irritating. Even though it is a good descriptive link, a better usability pattern here would be for the image to not be linked and just have the title linked, or for the image and title to share one link tag to basically be wrapped in a link. And sorry, my Zoom windows are in the way. Let me figure out how to move those out of the way. Okay, so NASA does this thing where on the NASA site, dragging my Zoom windows out of the way again. On the NASA site, each of these sort of post chunks is a single link, and they have, where's my tab? Let me see if I can get it to highlight. There we go. This isn't WordPress, but it's kind of a fancier design. See how the tab highlight lit up this whole block. So for them, they've got the image and the title within one link. So as your assistive technology is navigating around, you only hear each of these links once, and it's just a very logical list of content. You're not doubling up reading the images link and then the text link just below it. It's a very efficient way to it's an efficient navigation for screen readers. And my last configuration tip is every form element should have a label. And we mean every, even search, even menu in mobile. Many of us are used to looking at, looking at icons. Many of us are not. My husband has a master's degree, and my father is an actual computer programmer developer. And you would have to like explain to him what a magnifying glass is. He thinks magnifying glass means zoom. It gets him every time. Most people think, or I shouldn't say most people, but people generally mean that magnifying glasses are search. But where's my, there we go. So here, for example, the magnifying glass is next to the word search. As we shrink, the word menu appears next to the three stripes. It might seem a little simplistic to you to have these explicit labels, but not everyone has the same understanding of iconography or understanding of icons, or the same understanding of usability patterns, design patterns as those of us who are on the internet all the time. To some people, magnifying glass means zoom. It's a zoom. To some people, 3 horizontal rows means nothing. So it's always a good idea to have a label next to your form elements. So let me go back to Netflix. I was just, so this, and it means all form elements. So here we see, yeah, you can do the labels in screen reader text, but it's also kind of, it depends on what your audience is for your site. But I would say unless you have a particularly tech savvy audience, there's going to be people in your audience who are a little thrown by just using icons for navigation sometimes. Like not everyone gets that. And, stereotypically, older people maybe not always get them. And so even for, regular users who are not using assistive technology in any way, having the word menu, having the word search, it takes away an element of ambiguity. If a user is stressed out, in a hurry, they're desperately trying to find some information, and maybe you have it on your site, maybe you don't. Taking that extra time to figure out what an icon is, especially if you've got a stylized icon, like maybe it's a super cute little magnifying glass that, doesn't really look like a magnifying glass unless you're looking very closely at it. Or again, maybe people are on their phones and your magnifying glass is really, really small on your phones. Actually having a word there is just going to take away the ambiguity and remove an obstacle for understanding for your user. Let me see. So I'm going to inspect this and show you Netflix has an example of what I want to show. So, or was this my bad example? This is a good, okay, I have it in my notes as this is good. Here we go. Okay, so what you want to look for specifically in form elements is that the label is a label tag, and that the 4, see this 4 right here where it says id email hero Fuji, matches the id tag in the form element it's describing. And they're out of order here. The one is before the other, so that doesn't matter a whole lot. But basically this word right here in the 4 in the label tag should match the id in the form element itself.
Why is there a label tag wrapped
it
around though?
I don't know.
I feel like this is a bad example.
I feel like
too,
that's
if you
yes,
start
I'm sorry.
typing, will that label disappear and then you don't actually know what that field is? Well, I mean, you could guess.
I just noticed that when you said that, that there were 2 label tags for some reason.
That's weird.
Okay, so I tried a couple of widely used form plugins to see how they did with this accessibility tip. So here we have, this is WP Forms Lite, which is my favorite Forms plugin because it works and it's easy to use, and their documentation is so good that I even use it for things that aren't forms. Their documentation is excellent. So if we look at this, so just to show you in my admin panel. So this is the WP Forms plugin, and this is the simple contact form that just comes with the plugin. And you sort of click things, drag them around, and then you click embed, and it's like, which page do you want to embed it in? And if you don't have a page already, it'll make one for you. It's super easy. And what's nice about this is it already has the labels just how I need them. It's randomly generated the fields, so it's not, you know, really human readable. It says label 4 equals WP Forms 333 field 0, but it matches the id, and that's all that matters. So the assistive technology or the Google bot knows that this label is for this field, and that is good accessibility. Contact Form 7, which is another widely used contact form plugin, is not as good. If we look at it, this is, again, out of the box, the form that basically comes with the plugin. You can see that label up here, it has no parameters. And then input type down here, it has no id. But they do have a way you can get around that. There in my Contact Form 7 fixed. No, I need to go into the admin panel. I have included a link to the documentation for how to do this if you have Contact Form 7 and you want to know how to do this yourself. So looking at Contact Form 7, the default form looks like this. You can see it's got the label tags right there in the HTML for the form. So all you need to do is just go in and manually type the labels in yourself. Just put in the 4, and then the syntax is id, your name. And I've included a link in the slides to the document, how to, Contact Form 7's documentation on how to do this. So this gives us a form that has 4 and id parameters. And then if we go here and I inspect, you can see that my your name matches my input type. Where's my id? Your name. Not a particularly creative name, but all it needs to do is match the label and the input. And that's it for my stuff. Any questions on those things? We're going to turn it over to Stacy, and she's going to get a little more sophisticated with things you can do in CSS, or possibly these might be settings in Divi or whatever page builder you're using that you can control on a site-wide level. Okay, over to you, Stacy, and I'm going to stop sharing.
I need to find this. Okay, here.
Yeah.
I'm gonna
shuffle the windows around.
Awful looking casing on that slide first before I share it, because that was embarrassing. And maybe nobody will know. And I need to find my Zoom link. Can I share without going full screen? Is that?
It depends. You can pick a monitor, or you can just share, and we can look small.
I do want all of my small monitor. Otherwise, things get like really huge. Let's see here. Presenter view. Yeah, that works. Sweet. Okay, let me share my screen if I'm able to share the whole thing.
You should.
Yep. I will. Do you see you all floating over? You don't see you guys, right?
No, I just have the regular Zoom view. It looks as I would expect. I see your screen, and then everybody else is in the Zoom gallery.
All right, super. I will say that some accessibility testing tools will accept the label wrapping around the input without a 4. Like, you don't need a 4 in some cases, but some assisted technologies do. So they behave slightly different. So it's just best practice to always include that 4 that matches with the ID of the of the input, but it might not read as a warning or error if you're testing. So that's one thing to keep in mind
I'm
as you
gonna add
go.
that. I'll add that to my notes.
All right, so there's a lot of things we could go over with accessibility. And one thing I just noticed we didn't have at all is talking about color contrast, which I feel like is like the thing people think about. It's like alt text and color contrast when talking about making your website more accessible. And I know, well, Claire, you did bring it up about like being outside, like in the intro, sometimes, even if you don't have any sort of vision issue, that it's still sometimes hard to tell the text from the background, you know, depending on the level of contrast. But there is a certain amount of contrast that you do want, 4.5 to 1 ratio when you want to get to a AA rating on your accessibility score there. I don't know if, okay, to be announced. I'll save that for later when it's not recording. But we are going to go over a few like just design tips, and we said 10, and we can talk more after this if we want to jump into any more, but we wanted to make all these like somewhat not easy, but like, you know, you can follow a certain set of steps to implement to your current site here. One thing that will help a lot is to use relative units. Relative units are units within CSS that you can scale. So you know how like there's a JPEG and there's a vector SVG. People will say like, I need a vector file, because those files scale as big as you want them to. Well, it's kind of like this for text or spacing. A pixel, if you set something in a pixel, it doesn't scale well with the browser if the user changes their preference. But if you set it in something called an M or a rem, then that text will scale with the browser, and it will scale with when your user changes their own settings. So what does that look like? This is exactly what I just said out loud. So you can read that later if you want. But when you have a series of text, I made a little demo here that you can see on, well, you can't see. On the left, we're using runs and M's to set the text scale. And on the right, this is set in pixels. Well, to everyone here, I believe it will look the same. But what happens when you go into your settings and then you change this font size to be different than what the default is? You go back to that site and then you notice, oh, okay, so the text on the left scaled with the user preference, and so did the paragraph, because this usually comes into play when you change a heading size. If you go into WordPress and you select the font size and then you change it to custom and you type in a number, it's probably going to be set in pixels by default. So now you have just canceled the ability for that heading to scale when the user requests a larger type size. But your paragraph text scaled because you didn't override that base theme setting. I'm assuming most base themes will hopefully provide a scalable type solution these days. Now, this is what it looks like if you did override the text and the heading, the body copy and the heading. Everything on the right-hand side of the page that you set in pixels does not grow if the user wants a larger type size. But everything, may have said that wrong, everything on the right, everything on the left grew. So if your audience wants to set their own font size preference, but you have everything in pixels, it won't work for them. It won't get bigger. They can usually still zoom, but a lot of times people will have that set as a default, so they don't have to keep zooming in on every site. So what does that look like? Depending on your theme, some themes probably already have it. When you go into WordPress and you select a paragraph block and you look over on the right-hand side, maybe there's a PX there by default if you switch it over to custom, which we can do in a second here. But if they don't have any options for any other units, You can do that in a theme.js file, or JSON, sorry. That looks like what it's showing here. These are the lines that you need in that theme.json file for it to work. And I believe this will work whether you're using a universal theme, a hybrid theme, a full site editing theme. There may be one more line of text and functions that you have to tell it, hey, check this out. But this is all you need. And this would give you ems, rems, pixels, viewport width, percent. If you're not into like design, you don't need all these, right? You only really need like one or two of these. And probably pixels, just if you need to set a border, borders are still good in pixels because there's sub-pixel rendering issues. But ems and rems for anything text related, anything gap or padding, I highly recommend using ems or rems. Actually, let's jump over before we go there. Do a demo here. So in this typography box, I selected this text box. On this size, I could click on this and I have pixels by default. And look, I guess ems and rems did come along. I'm not sure if that's a WordPress thing these days. I'm sometimes unclear. What theme is used here is a copy of 2022, and I just made a few edits. So let's take a look at what I have in my theme file. See, I should have a whole lot more units, I would think, or maybe because I did spacing there. We'll have to figure that out. What was my slide was, yeah, spacing. Maybe there's another setting for text specifically because that spacing might only be for padding and margin. So I'll have to take a look at that and fix that slide if that's the case. But it really is only, okay, so part of core, cool, rems and ems. That's exciting news. So that you don't think that is because of the theme. It used to only be pixels, I believe, but if you have the option to set it in rems, I highly recommend doing that. If you're used to pixels, it might take some time to get used to the way rems look. Like one rem is usually around 16-ish pixels, depending. So if you need to do the math on that, it's a lot of times you go from one rem to like 2.5. So it's a smaller number range, but you can use like 1.25. It's not just, you know, whole numbers like you would for pixels. You can use fractions.
I think that setting must be, sorry.
Go ahead.
I was gonna say, I think that setting must be in WordPress itself, because on our demo site, it's for typography in a paragraph, it gives you the choice between pixels, ems, and rems. So they must have built that in recently.
So you don't even need a code snippet for that one.
Yeah.
I think it will be pixels by default.
It is, yeah.
So always see what you can do to adjust that and select rems. So rems are relative to the body, meaning if you've set the HTML or root font size, whatever you set for the rest of the page, if you do it in rems, it's relative to that like upper level container. And N is going to be sized based off of its parent container. So if you have an aside that has like a smaller font size and you have text in there that you set the font size to be some value in ems other than what it would normally be, that number will be based on just that aside parent container, not on the whole body. I know a lot of people use ems. I find them to be more confusing if you're like just getting into this, because if there is a thing that has a different size on the parent, you don't necessarily always know why the text in there is scaled differently than the rest of the page. But if you use ems globally, it's really cool how it can scale everything when you start using calc. And I don't want to get too nerdy here. The problem right now with all that is when you're editing in the WordPress block editor, you don't have access to body. You only have access to the editor block. So in order to scale everything the way I'd want to, we can't do that yet because the editor styles, you don't have access to root. And it's a problem. There's issues all over GitHub. They're working it out to see what we can do. But as of now, stick with REMs. It's going to be an easier stepping stones and then trying to figure out what's going on with them. But they're both almost the same. It's just, yeah, let's leave it with that. Always go with REMs. So you'll be safe with that. All right, tip number 9. When we're looking at a page of content, it's going to be easier to read text that has a limited line width than text that goes on for potentially ever. So if you have a big monitor and you are looking at Wikipedia, did my headphones just cut out? You good? Everyone hear me?
Yep, still hear you.
Okay, excellent. This is hard to read. Like maybe the first line is okay, but once your eye goes down to the second line, it gets a little tricky. So the recommended guidelines are you set it to no more than 80 characters wide. If you set it to be, with 80 characters though, that is different depending on the font size. So you don't necessarily want to set the width to be 80 characters because then the widths of your page might all be different if you have a headline on top of a paragraph block. I know a lot of people will look at a page that has an 80 character-ish width text column and see a lot of blank space. So I'm showing you ways here that this site has sort of approached that. They do the multi-column approach, which I think is great because then there's not a ton of blank space everywhere. I actually looked around for websites that use that negative space on the sides if you have a big monitor effectively. And there's not like a lot of great examples that at least I could find from one day of searching. I think WordPress.org does a fairly good job at like handling some of that blank space and not letting the text get too wide. I thought this approach here, the Milk Street website, was interesting because it kind of brings you back to this old school like newspaper feel where you have that multi-columns of text. But that's so like unusual in websites today. I wonder what like the legibility, like if people find that that's readable or not. It's very narrow, so you won't ever like scroll down off the page and then have to go back up. Oops, but it scales really well too. So when they start getting more narrow, it goes down to 3 and then 2 and then obviously 1 once they get more narrow. I just think that's a kind of a lovely way to limit line length and also explore your space. So once again, if we're looking at doing a programmatic way of limiting the width of your content in your theme, WordPress has a built-in way to tell the site to limit that column. I wrote 55 rems here, which was about 80 characters of the text I was currently using on the body. So it's just kind of a guess. It's not perfect. And then I tested it to make sure that it was about the right size. You can also set a wide size, which if you have seen like on a group block, there's a setting for align full, align wide, and then other like center, left, right, whatever. So this setting here is how wide do you want the wide size? And we can take a look at what that is in practice here. All right, so if I have a page here that has all this super wide line length, in my theme.json file, I have these lines here. I've folded all of this other stuff that was in 2022, so you don't need to see it right now. But if I save this, I go back over to my browser and I refresh, it didn't do anything. So let me see what's going on here. That's always, I might actually be using the wrong theme files because I found out the local set I was using installed it in the sites, or not the site, that local sites folder, which I never use. So I gotta go see if I'm actually editing the right thing. Yeah, move you all. Why is this not? Oh, I think I might know. That weird site editor thing. I think I might have to edit the template. Is that what I want to do? Hey, this is not the page I wanted. Templates. Page? No, maybe it's a single post. Oh my goodness. Let's see if I can find it again. First of all, let me go and look for the site. Where is that? I don't know. They don't have any questions while we look through this stuff.
You probably can't do this when you're doing that, but I would like to see if you could show your file system where you're adding theme.json and these
Okay.
other files that you're editing.
I can show you right now. Hopefully. So this is hopefully this is my active theme folder. Let's drag that to VS Code. That is correct, wasn't it? Let me shut that down. I wonder if this theme is active. All right, let me close this. So I made a complete copy of 2022. And then I went in and changed to like all the text domains to Stacy 2022. Just so I knew that I was, I was hoping I wouldn't get lost during this, but clearly that doesn't work. Theme.json is in the root folder of your theme. It's not a child theme. I just completely copied it. I don't know what the use of child themes is going to be moving forward because they don't really inherit a lot of the parent themes anymore in the full site editing stuff. So you'd have to bring in a lot of, I think, template parts. I think the the theme.json file, I don't think it inherits that. So it's almost, I wonder what the purpose of a child theme would be anymore. And it's written, in a very specific JSON-y type of file language. I did move some things around so that it could be more easy for the demo here. It's a lot of comma separated stuff or, list here. Let me look real quick.
So it can be, these snippets that you're showing can be added to a file and then you just call it theme.json. You can put it in any theme that doesn't already have one.
I have it in all of the themes we've done lately, and they're not full site editing themes.
So
yeah.
But what I'm saying is you don't need to create a child theme. You don't have to have a custom theme. You can just, whatever theme is on your site, you can just put this other code there in this file.
I wouldn't put it in a premium theme folder because it would get overridden. But if you have a custom theme or a child theme, you can put it in there. Okay. Unless it's like super old, I don't know. Like if you're not using a block editor anymore, or still, if you're not yet using the block editor, if you're using like the old classic editor or like WP Bakery or some of those older, or I actually don't even know how it works with like a full site from Divi, for instance. Assuming you're using block editor to edit your content, this should work. It should work because it affects blocks. So this is probably what you need to make that all work. I could be wrong. Let me just look through this real quick. Yeah, see, I didn't even inspect this site real quick, but I wonder why this isn't working here. Anyhow, or this, I guess, now. Let me just do a new page. That is a new post. That's probably also okay. All right. Now, another way to control, let me see if this might work. the content width that we saw is more easily applied if something is in a group, because in the layout panel here, see, it would say inherent theme width or something, inherent default width from theme. So I have an error somewhere, and this is probably supposed to be in settings. Oh my goodness. And I'll probably get a bunch of errors, so, or nothing, because I didn't save. Okay, there we go. Hey, it was just in the wrong place. So you know how it was super wide, and now it's more constrained, and we'll see it better on the front end, especially when, if you probably can't get back to that without refreshing it. I was hoping I can. Okay, maybe it will let me do that. All right, if I refresh this, yay, so that worked. Oh, thank goodness. Live demos are very scary. All right, so let me talk about this a little bit more. I just mentioned that controlling the width is sometimes easier done with the group block as opposed to paragraph. Because if you're writing everything in paragraphs by default do not have a width setting in WordPress. The paragraph block doesn't have any sort of, it doesn't need to, because it's flow content, so that it would just go with whatever container it's in. But if you put things within a group block, like this block quote is in a group block, and I've made the group full width. So it goes all the way across. And then if you select inherit default layout, that will tell the inner content when it's within the group to actually conform to that content width setting. And then the rest of the group, especially helpful if you have a background or an image or anything, can extend to the edge of the browser. So I can shut this off, and you can see that the block quote will extend. By default, it had some padding on it. That's why it's not touching the very edge. But you could edit your content width in rounds. And look at all those units. That fixed everything. Or maybe that was just spacing as opposed to type. Yeah, there's probably another setting for type units. Okay, so I did all these spacing units, but there's another setting that you can add for typography units, font size probably. But you could set different content widths here for the basic content and for the wide size. If you need a different size, maybe the type is really smaller, so then you want it to be even smaller than what your normal content width is. But in general, you can set it in that theme.json, and then your content won't extend past that point. So you're set on line length not being too wide, but also has some flexibility if you want things to go all the way to the edge. Questions on that super clear example? Yes, Claire.
I have a question. So you're saying 80 characters is a good guideline for how wide it should be. But obviously if your font is bigger, it's going to be fewer than 80 characters. Are you just sort of eyeballing, like, but you wouldn't want a bigger font to be further across the screen? Are you just sort of like eyeballing for a sort of an average font size and then keeping it at that?
That's what I'm doing. If it's only like one sentence, if it's like a super large headline, that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about like a block of text. If it's hard to read because your eye can't travel to the next line, that's when it gets like the limit should be in place, when anything is just not quite as legible. I believe 80 characters is the guideline, but I don't think that this would test in any tool. I don't think there would be a pass fail for this in any tool, but if you have a tool that says, hey, your lines are too long, I'd be interested to see that, just because of the type size. You can't say 80 characters because you'd have different widths for everything that has a different type size, and that would be chaos. So I just took the body copy and made that about 80 characters of that size, and then converted that to round.
Okay.
the moral of the story, just make sure it's not too wide. Make sure, I mean, a lot of sites have a sidebar really for that reason, because some people don't like negative space. They feel uncomfortable with it. So that's maybe why you still see some sidebars in places that might not need a sidebar if they don't have like secondary navigation. But yeah, secret is if it's just a paragraph and you want to constrain the width, you probably have to put it in some sort of container if your theme doesn't already have those limits. Now, if we switch to like Astra, for instance, let's not do that yet. We'll do that after all of the demos. But like Astra has that setting that I typed into theme.js built into the customizer. So you don't have to mess with going and making the theme.json file. And I'm sure many other premium themes or some open source themes have that as well. So that's another place you might want to check. It's usually in some sort of either general or design, and then I think Astra has it in containers category, which we'll go through in just a second. We're going to jump ahead though, before we jump back to the 10th tip, which is to try to avoid justified text. And I'm going to also add, sometimes centered text is hard to read because your starting point isn't the same every line. You have to jump all over. Justified text can often create these things we call rivers in design, especially when you start getting slightly smaller columns. This site that I showed earlier doesn't have justified text. I made it justified for this example. They did a very good job with design, and I ruined it for them, just so you could see what happens. Like you can look at the text and you can see these big gaps of white space, which makes it really hard, especially for people who have narrow vision. Like, to test this yourself, look through a straw and try to read a web page. And that brings me to another point. When your forms are not stacked with the labels on top of the inputs, maybe you have like 3 fields next to each other, sometimes people don't see anything past that first column because their narrow vision is going straight down. Sometimes it's hard to carry over to see other columns of form fields. So when you're making forms, be aware of that as well. But same goes for this justified text. I don't even know if justified is an option these days in the WordPress admin. I thought I saw it at some point. Just avoid it. It's not helping anything. Nope. Okay, I'm going to jump into this demo here. I think. I'm going to leave that. And limiting line width. Oh wait, we just did that. Oh, I did the little demo for screen reader text as well. So as you can see here, well, no, if you have sight, you might be able to see that right now there is a label that says screen reader text link with nothing after that. And then there's another label with screen reader text. Now, the difference of the WordPress screen reader text, if it's a link, it's still focusable because you still want your tab to focus there. If it's a link, like skip to content, skip to main navigation. So when I focus here, read more about screen reader only text will still show up on the top left of my screen. And that's intentional because that's a link that you should still be able to get to. You'll see the most common scenario for that is skip to main content on the website or skip to main navigation. So you see that on the front end once you tab, and then when you edit the page, like Claire showed, you don't see anything at all unless you select it. But that's wild. This link one isn't showing up at all when I click on it, but the paragraph one does. Wait, no, wait. Maybe I have these backwards. Is this the linked one? Let's look at the, see, it's hard to inspect. Let's look at the code. No, this one's the link one. That is right. Weird. Isn't that weird? If I select this, the linked one, you can't see. If I select the paragraph, oh, I still have the same text there probably. It's not the link. My label's wrong, but it is kind of weird to me. I wonder if there's another style that's overriding the selected version of it. Anyway, yeah, I recommend using the CodePen one where you get the little label over it. It's just a little easier to manage than using your outline and stumbling upon it. And that also ensures you don't have multiple headings that you can't see somewhere. Before we move on, I thought I had another page, but I could be wrong. Screen reader. No, I think that's it. Oh, yeah, this page I was just experimenting with those type sizes that you can add. So nothing important there. Claire, I don't know if we want to jump back over to you for these last few slides. I lost the presentation
sure.
window. I have 500 tabs open.
Yeah, just I think if you stop sharing, I can start. It's just our summary.
Yep.
Okay. Share screen to share. Okay, you should be able to see the alignment slide. Okay, so
Yes.
that was tip number 10. Never justify text. It has a sort of a Victorian newspaper look to it, which I guess if you had a Victorian newspaper would be useful, but not really for modern web page. Where are we going? My display has somehow become separated from my presenter view. There we go. Okay, so useful tools for accessibility that we've been using through this whole demo. To do the inspector that we've been doing to look at the small chunk of HTML. So you have to sort of click on an empty space. This is either going to be control click or right click if you're using a mouse. You can always view page source. That gives you the entire HTML document, which can be thousands of lines, and it's a little hard to read. But if you control or right click and then choose inspect, that gives you this Dev Tools window, and then you can use this icon to select particular images, or sorry, not images, particular elements on the page, and it'll skip right to that element that you've selected. Like if I, and then it hides it. But it's a way to look closely at particular elements on a page if you want to see how they look, if you want to check your form labels, if you want to see how many links there are next to each other, if you want to see that your alt tag is showing up correctly. Inspect is a handy tool. The other tool that I listed is this Chrome extension, SEO Meta in one click. That back. That I was using. It's this guy right here in my browser, and here's a link to where you can get it. And then as we've been doing, just tab around, just hit your tab button and see if you were, this will mimic how a screen reader works, and also sort of how Googlebot travels through a page as it jumps from link to link. And it'll help you understand how your navigation is experienced by someone who's not looking at the visual layout of the page. And then there's a few different ways you can get a sort of accessibility rating on your website. And Stacy mentioned that some of these aren't going to flag all the issues we've been talking about. There's a lot of variation. So you depending on who your client is, who your audience is, you probably don't want to put all your eggs in one basket, but using one of these is better than using none of these. So the Google one is if you do the right click or control click and inspect, and then go to this lighthouse tab over here on the right, and then run a report. And you can do this on any website. You don't have to own the website. And you can choose accessibility, performance, and so on forth. Click analyze page load. It takes several minutes to run. So I'm just going to start it and then maybe it'll be done later. Did it start? There we go. The next one, WebAIM, used to be called WebAIM, is now called Wave. I did Washington Post. It gives you this sort of interactive view where it'll show you what errors are. This is a great example of like how people don't necessarily understand what icons are, because purple trapezoids mean something and I don't know what they mean, but I think if you click around here enough, you will be able to tell what it's telling you. Like an unordered list. Is that really a problem? I couldn't tell you. I think they're probably a little pickier because they're WebAIM. They're a little pickier than some of the other tests. But it's a good way to get a handle on what's going on the website. It'll show you your structure. Not quite as nicely.
Yeah, only
as
those red ones are the errors.
Okay.
So anything labeled
So
is an element that has some sort of semantic meaning, but only the red ones are problematic.
Okay, so the others is just telling me about. That is confusing. And then alerts are probably something to check out too. And then what was my next one? W3 validator. This is a straight up, again, I did Washington Post. Not really a cosmetic report at all. It's just going to tell you, according to W3C3 standards, the exact correctness of your HTML in your website. So if you're shooting for a very high standard of accessibility, this is probably something to worry about. Otherwise, I would just run through this and make sure that you don't have any glaring problems like, you've got 2 H1s on a page, or I guess parse errors are a problem. But this is the Washington Post, and considering that they have an entire truckload of errors, it's probably pretty hard to meet the standard for this particular accessibility checker. This is a lot of errors for what most of us would consider a pretty professional website. And then I found one, A checker, which wouldn't even work on Washington Post, but I tried it on Smitten Kitchen, and it returned things like you don't have alt text. This one I find a little more useful for the sort of everyday sites that we deal with. Its errors are things like you're missing alt text. The anchor contains no text. They just had, for some reason, a blank link with nothing to actually click on in there. And there's form elements missing labels. So this is useful feedback. This is a checker, and you can run it on any website, and it's giving useful feedback for things that are stuff that we've talked about today, things that are you can go and find in your content and fix in your content, or you can look for a theme that doesn't generate this sort of problem for you. This is all sort of just plain old content error. And Stacy added more. Koala.
I love this little tool. It's similar to the well, you have to download
it's desktop. Okay.
Yeah, but it works with a number of different sites. Yeah, a sample report there. It tells you in very, very minute detail every single thing that is wrong and potentially wrong, and sometimes even for AAA, so it tells you the level. And before you run the report, if you were to download it, there's options to test whether you're going against like AA or Section 508 if you're in higher education. For any sort of publicly funded education program, you would need to be 508 compliant. So it has different levels of which issues will rise to the level of warning versus error. And I found it to be very helpful, especially when I was working in higher education, to go through.
Yeah, so totally useful if you're actually trying to get certification. That's great. Especially the way it cites exactly which guideline is being violated. Screen readers. Whoops, back.
If you're on a Mac, I think you don't have to do any other setting other than hit Command F5. I feel like it works best when you're in Safari because it will read things a certain way. And then you can go through the page as if you would be, if you were using it and you were visually impaired, you can tab through and you can hear potentially the fabulous link text and heading text that you have, or where you have room for improvement. So I highly recommend trying your voiceover. You might want to wear headphones if anyone else is in the room with you. Like my kids walked by today when I was using it and they gave me the weirdest look that someone was yelling, "Link visited," about us. And then, just kept reading out stuff like that. So it's a great tool. It's built right in to your Mac. You can also download NVIDIA, only available for PCs running that version of Windows or later. I believe it's open source, free. And then I think another industry standard is JAWS. However, I don't know if that one is free. But it's a great way to test the site. Also, you can use dictation, or not dictation, but voiceover on your phone as well. If you want to test on your phone, that's another option for you.
Good idea. Cool. That's it. Any more questions? Thank you. I'm gonna stop screen sharing. Oh, Leah Whitney, I saw you had a question. Where'd you go?
Hi, I'm here. I just
Hi,
turned out like, I'm terrible
just trying to
today.
find my windows.
But I just threw my camera on because I'm like, it's better to ask questions sometimes when you can see people. But anyway, I wanted to just mention that there will be a new making content usable for people with cognitive and learning disabilities coming out in about a month. I joined their work group for it's called COGA. So and the way they pronounce it, I learned it's called WCAG.
Oh, okay. That's good to know.
Yeah.
That sounds like they would actually know. WCAG.
Yeah. WCAG.
I will use that in the future rather than making up my way to say it.
Yeah, that seems to be how they say it. Because that was the first thing I asked was, okay, how is it said exactly? But COGA focuses on cognitive. So any people with neurodiversity, so that's autism. And then there's ADHD, ADD, those are cognitive related. And then there's also intellectual and developmental disabilities. So yeah, so those are all underneath that umbrella of COGA, cognitive.
Excellent, thanks.
Yeah, this has been very, very helpful. Thank you so much. I found this to be extremely helpful. And I'm still putting together AbleMath, which is the WordPress platform. So yeah.
That's great.
Great, thank you.
Glad you said that, because I know you've been learning about this and working within this for a long time now. You never know like how this will come across. Like if we only talked about color contrast, people would be like, oh, I already know that. So it's good to have like some feedback about like maybe, even pros learn something somewhat.
Yeah, I'm trying to get my CPAC certification too, which is to certified professional in accessibility through the IAAP. Anyway, there's a million acronyms and I'm still learning all of them, but this is
what I would like then, once you have that, is for someone to talk to us about, like, I know technically how to apply a lot of these rules to websites. What I don't always know, because I haven't always lived in those shoes, like I have had the issues with not being able to see something, or I listen to a lot of videos. So if I'm watching a video by listening and they're not saying anything, I don't know what's happening. So like those types of things where I wish people would just talk through what they're doing sometimes instead of like, oh, watch me work or whatever. But so like what I'm trying to get to is like the content is sometimes what I'm unclear. What would be best is sometimes it's too verbose if you put too much in like a title tag. And so like, what's the right amount? What do people want to know? And like, how much do they want to know it is what I'm always like looking for guidance on. I guess it's like more subjective content to add to some of these things.
Yeah, well, the reason what I did is recently, and about 2 weeks ago, I did some remote usability testing with individuals with a whole company who focuses on hiring people who have autism. And then I did a separate remote usability test, and they all tested the WordPress site that we have. It's still a prototype. And I was able to ask some of them those questions because this is built for, it's all for them, but the UX and UI approach is built based on their needs from their standpoint to look for employment. And so some of the feedback, they said, well, a lot of us go to like government websites and we really hate how some government websites have too many links put, too close together. And so they really didn't they were that kind of detailed. This is the company that hires individuals who have autism specifically. These were those people I was talking to. So all of that was just
That's great feedback.
really helpful and opened up my mind, because the layout, we have, it's just very simple. And they like that, but you never know, like you were talking about negative white space, how much there is, or if it's too much. But depending on the kind of tool, because this is a tool that's not exactly a website for everybody. Although technically, if you build for accessibility, you kind of are building for everybody. So
the web is accessible by default. And we're the ones who break it over and over and over again. And I will say WordPress is also accessible by default. It is until we start adding content, which we break it, and plugins, which often will not necessarily break it, but sometimes the way they're automatically applied. Like I know, I don't want to say on the recording, so I'm not going to, but there's certain like form plugins or whatnot that don't have labels. I know we went over some of them today, but I'm thinking of some other ones. And there's a few like ones that I always know that we're going to have to go in and change how something's written. But yeah.
There is a WordPress overlay that we were thinking of using. Overlays can be really controversial, actually. So, I'm actually, I was wondering, I'm like still wondering about that, but I honestly, I don't really like them, and I don't, for my purposes, it's not very intuitive, the overlays, because there's this menu, and then sometimes these individuals don't really know what they are, but they're not explained to them, those options. And if they don't have screen readers already, so that's one of the things that I found on so far with using aspects of WordPress. So yeah, but thank you guys. This has been very, very, very helpful. I'm gonna watch the recording.
Thanks, Leah. I'm going to stop the recording now.